Listen, my children, and you shall hear of a lovely feminine Paul Revere, who rode an equally famous ride through a different part of the countryside, where Sybil Ludington's name recalls a ride as daring as that of Paul's. In 1940, Burton Braley modified the opening lines of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem Paul Revere's Ride to feature a long-forgotten hero of the American Revolution, Sybil Ludington. My name is Rachel Thompson, and I'm here today to talk about Sybil Ludington. On the night of April 26, 1777, in Carmel, New York, 16-year-old Sybil Ludington made history. She rode 40 miles through the countryside to mobilize local militia as the British descended upon Danbury. Her midnight ride has been noted to be significantly longer than Paul Revere's 12-mile ride. The New York militia did not arrive quickly enough to spare Danbury the violence of the British Army, who, upon taking Danbury, destroyed Continental supplies and set fire to the town. This failure has not undermined her acclaim for the bravery she exhibited, but her road to fame was not immediate, and it was not observed in her lifetime. As in the case of Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's How Betsy Ross Became Famous, Sybil's story would have additional meaning constructed from it after her death. Sybil married Sergeant Edmund Ogden after the war's end, and they had one son, Henry Ogden. 39 years after Edmund Ogden's untimely death, she was unable to secure his military pension because her paperwork was rejected for insufficient proof of her marriage to Ogden. In the submitted affidavits proving Ogden's service, she did not mention her midnight ride as a reason to collect the pension. She passed away the following year at age 77. Later in the 19th century, there was a revival in interest in the American Revolution in the decades surrounding its centennial. That is the 100-year anniversary of the American Revolution. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich noted in How Betsy Ross Became Famous that by the 1970s, there were hundreds of stories about the contributions of women to the American Revolution. Yet none were being circulated about Sybil Ludington. Sybil was notably omitted from texts that celebrated the American Revolution and women in the American Revolution in the closing decades of the 1800s. Sybil Ludington remained largely absent from histories of women in the Revolution, with the exception of a story written about New York in 1880 by Martha J. Lamb. Perhaps the first reference to or study of her ride, and a biography written by Willis Fletcher Johnson centered upon her father's contributions to the Revolution in 1907. It was not until the 1930s that the Enoch Crosby chapter of the Daughters of the Revolution embraced her story and sought to map the course of her ride. Historical markers denoting the possible path of her ride were installed during the years of the Great Depression. This proved to be timely as Americans delighted in unlikely heroes overcoming adversity, such as Little Orphan Annie and Seabiscuit. These were years when many people were struggling through the bad economy. The everyman heroes from the American Revolution resurfaced in popular culture, and among them was Sybil Ludington. In 1940, the Braley poem was published highlighting Sybil's midnight ride. Similarly to the circumstances of Longfellow's poem, once more the United States was on the verge of war, as it was in 1860 when Longfellow published his poem. Women's contributions to the war effort during World War II and the nationalism inspired by the war effort further elevated her story as a young female hero of the American Revolution. Stories from the Revolution were powerful symbols of patriotism, and Sybil's story is one of a young lady serving the war effort. Women mobilized on the home front during World War II to serve the war effort in a variety of ways, including assuming war industry jobs that would have been traditionally occupied by men, and women were serving in those jobs in their absence due to the war. Similarly to Sybil's midnight ride, which would have traditionally been a task designated for a male. Eric Berry, a children's author, illustrated her daring tale in Sybil Ludington's Ride, published in 1952. He developed fictional tales of her ride that have become an integral part of the legend that surrounds her. Among several details not substantiated by any studies of histories of Sybil, perhaps most famously, he named her horse Star. She was valued again for her self-reliance, independence, and patriotism, as a symbol of rebellious youth as the first teenage culture became mainstream in the 1950s, and additionally as a model of American exceptionalism during the tumultuous years of the Cold War, when Girl Scouts in Putnam County, New York earned badges as Sybil Ludington's camp and hiked along the supposed route of her ride laid out by the historical markers of the 1930s. Over the course of the 1960s and into the final decades of the 20th century, she was transformed into a feminist symbol. Planning for the International Year of the Woman in 1975 and America's Bicentennial in 1976 garnered further attention for her story. She was featured in the presentation Our American Foremothers, exhibited by the National Organization for Women in 1972, and the 1976 documentary, The American Woman, Portraits of Courage, opened with a scene exhibiting her famous ride. Since the bicentennial, Sybil Ludington has been featured in countless scholarly and educational contexts and has gained an important place in the stories of the American Revolution. Thanks for watching!